Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about climate change throughout the wine industry. My name is Gianna, and I'm going to be discussing some of the disadvantages to climate change in the wine industry. And my partner Sabrina will be talking a little bit about some of the advantages of this. We hope you guys enjoy. So, climate change has been a topic of interest amongst the world today, just considering global warming and trying to work on helping the environment. But some people don't really know the full extent of what climate change covers. So, the basic definition of climate change is basically a change in global or regional climate patterns. And this typically occurs through atmosphere changes, or in other words, changes in the air, such as through levels of carbon dioxide or the burning of fossil fuels, which potentially harms our environment and causes global warming and overall climate change. Um, the concern for this has increased drastically throughout the 20th century just because of the mass amounts of pollution being emitted throughout this era. That's why a lot of people have been discussing the environment more during this century, just because it's been more of an apparent problem throughout this century. So now that we kind of got into how climate change affects the whole world, I'm just going to move into how climate change affects the wine industry. So, as one may guess, there's a lot of disadvantages to being a winemaker, as climate change becomes more of a bigger problem across many countries who sometimes may be known for their wine. So, for example, I know some regions in Italy and some in Greece are known for their great tasting wine. And if climate change harms this process, the aftermath might be hard to come back from, therefore, leaving the wine industry in these areas kind of compromised in the way that they make wine, depending on temperatures and weather changes. So, with that being said, a few topics that I'm going to get into that discuss the disadvantages to climate change in the wine industry are the sensitivity of grapes, the potential to relocate, and the fact that weather can ruin the effects of wine. So, getting into one of the first topics that cause the negative effects from climate change in the wine industry is the fact that grapes are really sensitive. So, obviously, as we all know, grapes are the main staple in making wine. So, if anything obstructs this process, there could be a shortage of wine or just overall problems with the way it tastes. So, temperature makes this kind of hard because grapes are especially sensitive to higher temperatures. So, high temperatures can cause the grapes to just become damaged and become smaller and not typically grow right, which can eventually lead to less wine or overall flavor of wine lacking. So, a statistic showed that if the temperature of the earth increases by the slightest 3.6 degrees, grapes could become extremely damaged. So, as you can see, the slightest increase in temperature of the earth can affect the taste of the wine and how it's produced. So, as I mentioned before, temperature is a big outcome of climate change, as we can see today throughout the world. So, temperature also applies to how wine is grown, how it's processed, and just the way it's distributed. So, relocation in winemaking can be a big possibility in certain industries. So, again, as temperature changes, some may have to relocate. So, for example, it all relates back to how the grapes are grown. So, again, if it's too hot in some location, then the industry might have to relocate just to grow better wine overall. Um, so, that's why, again, certain regions, such as Italy or Greece, have different tasting wines because it all depends on how they're grown and the temperature and also the weather, which I'm going to get into next. So, my last topic that I'm going to get into regarding the disadvantages in climate change on the wine industry relate to weather. So, as I mentioned before, higher temperatures make different kinds of grapes, which sometimes is not a bad thing, but it can change the desired flavor of what was expected of the grapes regarding their sweetness and their acidity. But other than the temperature, varied precipitation can also become a disruptance in growing the grapevine. So, for example, the more rain, the more soil erosion occurs, which can flood the soil and make um, the grapevine damaged. But on the other hand, the less rain make the grapevine more weak and also overall cause dry conditions. Um, so the crucial way to growing grapevines is to allow the grapes to um, last in an environment where it rains in the beginning and then dry periods come along. So the rain is essential for the seeds to start developing, but then the dry periods are also essential in forming the grapevines and the sunlight hitting it so the grapevine can properly grow. So now that we kind of discussed the disadvantages of climate change in the wine industry, Sabrina's going to discuss some of the advantages throughout this industry. So now
First, I'm going to address the new economic opportunities that global climate change has provided the wine industry. So, areas that did not have much tourism and economic value before are now producing some of the best wines. For example, 30 years ago, English wines were almost unheard of. Nowadays, English produce some of the world's premier wines in the sparkling wine industry, since they're able to produce using the same method as Champagne, France. This is causing them to have more tourism through wine visits and more. Some quality vineyards are also opening up in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Belgium, all which used to be too cold to produce worthy wines, but now are able to expand their economies. As shown by the diagram, the wine industry is shifting in the southern hemisphere as well as it pushes into Patagonia in Argentina and Chile. As noted in an article in New York Times, these areas in the southern hemisphere are more experimental currently, but in the future, they're likely to produce some of the best wines. As a result of the geographical shifts in different countries being the centers of quality wine, major wine producers are now buying vineyards in new countries and other countries to maintain their share in the premier wine market. This is causing more investment in countries that tended to just be very isolated and to themselves. Furthermore, as a result of the climate change, producers are able to produce wines in areas with altitudes that were once inhospitable to wine grapes. However, these higher altitudes are now becoming increasingly better for wine growing, since at higher elevations, peak temperatures are not necessarily drastically cooler, but the intensity of the heat lasts for shorter durations and are generally colder at night than the lower altitudes. This means that mountainous and high altitude areas that could not benefit from agriculture and tended to have less cities can now have economic benefits of the wine industry, such as tourism and sales. On the left, you can see a picture of one of the first high altitude wineries in the southern hemisphere, which is Catena Zapata, that opened in Argentina in the 1990s at an altitude of 5,000 feet. Global warming is also bringing new flavors to the wine industry, which is very exciting. Due to the diurnal shift in higher altitudes, the grapes ripen over a longer period of time and is known to bring more complexity to the wine's flavor. This is demonstrated by wines produced at Catania Zapata, as the founder first founded the high altitude winery because he wanted a complexity to his wines that he could not achieve at lower altitudes, and did not, in fact, find the winery in response to global warming. Furthermore, through research for the Australian Journal of Grape and Wine Research, Professor Marcus Keller discovered that high temperatures diminish the veggie herbaceous notes that are not desired in many red wines. Wine producers attempt to avoid these flavors, and with the increased temperature causing them to become less prevalent, global warming is diminishing the producers' concerns and worries with this problem, and at the same time, drinkers are less likely to be unpleasantly surprised by these notes. Lastly, new wine flavors are being experimented with, which is exciting for the art of wine. For instance, Miguel Torres in Spain is reviving the grape industry in the hotter and drier climates, as he identified that they can offer 5 exceptional flavors in particular, including a floral scented Forcada, which is a white wine with citrus and mineral notes.